The objective of this painting was quite a few. It's composition. First of all, let me tell you where it is. It's Stillwater Cove, Northern California. But to be honest with you, it's got some similarities with many other places in the world. It could be some parts of the UK, Cornwall, West Wales, Ireland, Scotland, probably more on the West Coast. So it's got a lot of similarities with many coastal areas that we'll all be familiar with. But a lovely, bright, sunny day. It's going to be an exercise in composition, but particularly simplification of all of those rock shapes. More on that in a minute. It's going to be an exercise in values as well. It's a lovely, bright, sunny day. We've got lots of lights and darks. We've got the light of the waves, the swell in the sea, the disturbance on the surface of the water, and then the darks of the shadows and the trees. So nice. We can play on that contrast, light and dark. We can also play on the contrast of warm versus cool, the cool of the sea, the warmth of the rocks. Look how warm certain sections are. Look, there's almost like a sort of orangey, ochre sort of streak to some of these rocks. I think that's quite nice as well to play on that contrast of warm versus cool. And also depth, trying to get a feeling of depth. The distance, for example, the distant background cliffs, trying to push them back, not too much detail, keep them soft, keep them fairly light in value. And then the edges, the harder edges, will be in the middle area and the foreground. So that's the subject for the painting, Stillwater Cove. And we always circulate our subjects on Patreon. And it's my intention to always choose the monthly painting project from our source library that you all contribute to. So thanks very much, all of you that have contributed so far. Keep them coming. I think we might be doing a desert one soon. I did ask for that on a recent Pat chat. Right, materials. So I've got Saunders Waterford cold press paper, medium roughness, 15 by 11. Colours wise for Mark Jackman, colours wise I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt turquoise, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, English oxide or light red, cadmium orange, and cadmium yellow. There's a couple of gouache colours down here in the bottom right corner, a Naples yellow light gouache and a white gouache, and a lavender here as well. So fairly sort of opaque-ish colours. If I need to get fairly thick with the paint application, then I've got those down there. Brushes wise, I will describe them as I go through. Sometimes I do a little thumbnail sketch, just my thoughts on how I'm going to approach the composition and values. So talking about simplification of the scene and all of those different rock shapes, we've got lots of rocks in there, but I'm thinking about trying to capitalize on the light areas and also trying to connect the different rock shapes. So my thoughts are to try and, there's this rock here, that bigger one there in the middle ground, trying to connect those. Do you see? And then if I can, try and sneak in another little bit of contrast of light against dark, light against the dark, the far side of the beach. This is quite a nice area of contrast here. The dark left-hand side of that rock and the lightness of the sea behind. Things to remove. On our last Pat chat a few days ago, our regular online get-togethers, we were discussing this subject, and there was talk about this this branch, this pine tree branch sticking out there over the sea. And I think it was Fausia quite rightly said, what are you going to do about that? Because the value of that green is very similar to the value of the sea. And shall we include it? My thinking was, well, we could go lighter there, we could go darker, or possibly even imagine it's not there at all. And I think that's what I'm going to do for this one. Keep it simple, imagine it's not there. There's another dark shape over here, which I think again is another limb of some pine, the pine tree coming over from the left-hand side. That actually could double up as maybe a dark shape in the rocks there. So I might keep that shape in there, but my inclination is to not bother with that pine, those pine leaves on that right-hand side. So that's the thumbnail sketch then, trying to connect these different shapes, those smaller little rocky outcrops in the water there again, trying to connect those. There is another, looking closely at the photo, I think that's another little rocky bit there, right on the right-hand side. I think it's, for me, it's too far over on the right-hand side, and it would detract from what's going on here. So my inclination is to not bother with that rock over there. Keep all these little rocks on the left-hand side and try and connect them and reduce the number as well. Keep it simple. By all means, if you want to get them all in and go for very precise replication of what we see here, then you do that. And if you want to paint in your own style, I know quite a few of you like doing liner wash, and they're lovely to see. On the last project, I think 3 of you did liner wash. Yeah, do that as well. Go for liner wash. You don't need to follow my particular style. All right, let's make a start then with the initial drawing. And first of all, that rock with the dark, this rock here, I'm going to, with the darkness on the left-hand side, the light on the right side, I'm just going to move it up a little bit, so that sort of area there, and make more of a feature of this little inlet here. Okay, less of those boulders in the water and at the base of the rock. So I'll make these lines darker when I'm done. Right, so this is this rock I wanted to make a feature of with the dark left-hand side. It's connected with the little rocky outcrop in the middle ground. There are these smaller boulders just further out to sea, and let's have them connected a little bit as well. Let's have 3 of those. So the left-hand side of here, we've got a little tiny inlet and very much sort of white water in there. And then the rocks come around, and we've got the right-hand side, and there's a sort of, looks like a ledge. So we come up on the right-hand side, this bottom right-hand corner, there's a bit of a ledge here. And I think there's a tiny bit of light, a sort of shard of light catching that ledge, that sort of horizontal platform there, and a little bit of light also catching some of these branches as well. So let's get in that ledge, and then we've got the tree going over there on that right hand side, a nice sort of framing of that right hand side, and then the limbs coming over to connect the different elements of the scene going over. Over in the distance, we've got this little beach, which I think would be good to include. And behind the beach, there's the rocks rising above the beach. And I don't want to put too much detail into the background, just to get the feeling of those distant cliffs. There's a sort of, I guess it's a road or a trail. I know it's a popular area for campers and hikers. So there's a bit of a level platform there, and then I think the forest, the pine forest behind that, but maybe a little bit of light hitting that area there. And there's a bit of light there and a bit of light there. So light, dark, light, dark. Just back on the left-hand side then, let's just make sure I've got these rocks pretty much, the main shape of these rocks, pretty much right for my thoughts on the composition. And maybe just a bit of cross hatching with my pencil there, just to give an indication of where that real darkness will be. All right, let's make some of these lines a little bit darker for you. I wouldn't normally do this, it was just me, but this is just so it shows up on camera for you. Now, the actual skyline, I'm not going to make that too dark, because I want that to be a fairly soft edge, the transition from the sky to the forest. But if you can make it out, it's roughly there, the tree line. And then we've got that horizontal ledge, where the trail or the road is, I guess. There's the base of the rocks coming down to the beach, the water's edge there, then the water's edge continuing over the right hand side, a little bit of light hitting some of those rocks. Middle ground, our middle rock, there are some trees. There are some trees just clinging on for life there. It looks as if they're a little bit stressed. Don't have any leaves, but it's too much detail. All right, so let's imagine there's no real sort of vegetation on there. There's a little bit of greenery, little sort of, I guess, succulents, or grassy vegetation at the top there. And down to the water's edge. And then within these rocks, there are some deep cracks or fissures where there's a bit of dark shadow in there. I'm not going to draw them all in, but for example, there's a nice sort of square, almost squarish rock in there, and then another sort of boulder next to it, and then a bigger boulder there. The right hand side, this is all in shade. There are some grasses here in the bottom right corner, but that's too much detail, okay, for me. I want to keep that corner very simple, and likewise over on the left hand side there's some more vegetation here. I don't know whether this is some kind of rail or broken tree trunk. Not bother putting that in. And also there is the framing on that left hand side is another tree trunk here of a pine tree. Again, I'm going to leave that one out. I assume it's a pine tree. Again, I'm going to leave that one out. I assume these are some side limbs growing off there. All right, so that is pretty much the composition. Hopefully you can see the pencil outline okay. If there's no questions, I will start painting. Now, prior to painting, prior to getting down the wash, because at the moment where I am, it's quite warm and quite dry, I'm going to pre-soak the paper. I don't often do this, but I'm going to pre-soak the paper just a little bit to really give me a longer time to work with the paint, try and get some soft edges, and the paper will accept the paint a little bit more generously. So I'm just going to dampen the surface a little bit. You could use, if you want to do this, you could use a sponge or a large flat brush, but just with a damp sponge, I'm just lightly getting that over the surface, not too much. But as I say, because it's quite dry and quite warm here at the moment, particularly the background. So I want to get that soft transition from the sky to the field, to the forest in the distance. There we go. All right. Let me just check for questions. Okay, no questions. Right. Painting. Brushes. I'm going to paint a majority of this painting with a mop brush. This is a Tintoretto. I'm often changing my brushes at the moment. My brush in favour is this Tintoretto, an Italian synthetic mop brush. It's got a very good point, as you can see. And it's actually lasted quite a long time as well. I've had this a few months now. Quite happy with it. This is a size 6. So starting from the top, let's get in that sky. I think things are drying off quite rapidly. So let's get in that sky. A little bit of cerulean blue. Over that top portion. Very thin slither of sky, but we need it. We need that bit of sky in there just to give it some sort of context and the feeling of the distance there and the context of that forest. Now, next, those trees. So these trees, yes, they're green. We don't want to go too vibrant with the green, otherwise that's going to bring things forward. We want to get the sense of depth. So a cool green, I think. A lot of the trees there are sort of more, almost like a grayish green in a way. I'm going to try and replicate that color and value with a little bit of viridian green and a tiny bit of ultramarine blue. Now I need to be a little bit thicker in consistency compared to the sky. I want to get that soft edge, a little bit of burnt umber, but predominantly this viridian green. A little bit of ultramarine blue. It's a little bit too dark. A bit greener. Continue from side to side. Just a little bit of this light green just to create. There are some lighter green trees on the right hand side. Okay. Just lift off a little bit of some of that paint to give the feeling of those different trees. The cliffs below that tree line is a warmer colour. And I'm going to go with these cliffs here. The base colour of this is going to be, well, a little bit of a yellow ochre, maybe a bit of cad orange, something quite warm. So a bit of cad orange, a bit of yellow ochre. And then get in that layer of those rocks. Left a little bit of light there. That could be the indication of that trail across the top. And the base of these rocks are darker. As the rocks come down here to the water's edge, they get darker, they get cooler. So maybe a burnt umber and a little bit of ultramarine blue. And while I'm doing this, I could put in some of the shadow of some of those rocks. The shadow of some of those cliffs over there. Next, we'll get the beach in here, which is going to be a very pale yellow ochre. That's a little rock that I can see. There's a few more smaller ones going over to the right. There we go. That's that background done. Next, the sea. Let's do the sea next. Right, just take a while to observe this water and think of preserving the lights by leaving the paper unpainted. So these larger white areas here, but also thinking about the color of the water. It's a little bit contaminated towards the shoreline. We've got that more of a sort of brownish, light ochreish feel to the water. But then as we come out, we go green, and then there's actually quite a dark blue in the distance there, almost a turquoise sort of a color. And also think about trying to get the movement of the water. As Fauzier asked on the patch out, why is it called Stillwater Cove when it's actually quite a bit of movement in the water? So let's try and create that bit of movement with our brush marks as we create this sea. Particularly noticeable in that area there, those sort of marks, that bit of a curve, that shape of that brush in there, a little bit down towards the cliffs below us as well. So trying to get the shape of that water, and then painting around the lighter areas around the rocks, and we'll soften up those edges later on. So first of all, the water near the beach here. And then we're going to get more of a turquoise color to the water. Leave a little bit of the paper unpainted as we come around those rocks. Doesn't matter if you leave a little bit of the paper unpainted, that could be just a little wave. All right, now the middle area here. So a lot of this cobalt turquoise. Go over to the right-hand side. A lot of this area is going to be hidden by the tree. Now I'm coming down to these middle rocks and coming down to the top of the rocks, but then the bottom of the rocks I want to leave unpainted. There's a bit of movement in the water there. And just vary the intensity of this water as we come down to the foreground. Maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue in places. There we are. I might go in with a little bit of a darker value for some of those waves closer to us, just to create more of a form of the waves. But that's really the main wash done. And I'll also later on just try and soften up some of these edges with a smaller brush as well. Just behind this rock here, there might be just a little bit of lighter color to that sea. But on the whole, it's all that value of turquoise. Right, next is going to be these rocks on the left-hand side, starting with the middle ground rocks. Now, just observing these rocks, to me, it looks like they've got a fairly, like this one here, fairly sort of warmish color at the top. Then we get more of a cooler gray, and then at the bottom, it's almost like 3/3. The bottom third is a darker brown, almost like a burnt umber, I guess. So trying to get that sort of variation in those different colors and values. So I'll stick with my mop brush. And that color at the top. Now I've got to be careful here because the actual background is still a little bit wet. Use some of this color here to create this grayish, bit of burnt sienna. Some of this wash here that I was using for the sea, that's going to create that sort of grey color. Now, a little bit of burnt umber, a little bit of ultramarine blue, a bit of burnt umber for the bottom of those rocks. I will go darker than this for the shadows, but just to get in this sort of base color. Now I'm going around the top of this key rock here, closer to us. And also these rocks as well. Right, continue on the left hand side. Just got to get in these different subtle variations of color and value, warms and cools. Lighter, generally lighter at the top of these rocks, and then darker at the base. In this bottom left hand corner, it's actually, there is a lot of orange in here. I'm not sure if it's dead vegetation or the actual rock, but let's go with that theme of a warmer color in that bottom left corner. Again, just vary a little bit. So I've got a cooler color here, warmer color here. Now this key rock here, a little bit of light. On the right hand side, warm at the top, and now a little bit grayer as we come down. And then darker still, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, again I might go a little bit darker on those rocks. little bit of light hitting the ledge there. And then another little ledge there, of a couple of ledges. And then just get in some colour into this bottom right corner, bit of ridging green, burnt umber. Again, I'm going to go darker in there. Just gonna take the edge off the paper. Burnt umber. There we are. That's really the initial wash done. Background, covering those rocks, the main part of the sea, preserving the lights of the paper. I will soften up some of these edges later on. Yeah, so far so good. Next is going to be now to add some darker values to the background, not too dark, but get into some darker values where we've got this shade, the light's coming from the right, where we've got a bit of shade on the left-hand side, just create some form to those rocks, and also get a bit of darkness around this middle rock here. That's going to make that stand out just a little bit more. Just use my fingers. I just noticed those edges getting a little bit too hard. There we go. Right, the shadow for the background cliffs. I'm going to use a little flat brush. I could use my mop brush still with a good edge to it, all right, but it's going to be slightly easier with this flat brush here. And I want to get into some darker shadows, but as I say, not too dark. Okay, let's keep it fairly cool. A little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of burnt sienna, cobalt blue, and then just create a little bit of darker shade and form to those background trees and cliffs. Ideally, if this background is still a little bit damp for you, you're going to get a softer edge as well, which would be ideal. So flat brush, start at the bottom of the cliffs and just lightly brush upwards, getting that darker valley at the bottom and slightly lighter towards the top. Just continue over. And now I'm sort of in this position now. We've got a darker shadow here on the right-hand edge of that beach. Burnt umber. cobalt blue, and these shadows, they go up to the top of the cliffs, up to that sort of pathway, that trail. There's this rock here. And then continue over. There we are. Just above that trail, the base of some of the trees are a little bit darker. So I'll do the same thing for some of those trees. Let's just check this works all right. Just a few of those trees. If I don't like those square edges too much, I can just quickly lift them off with the finger. Put another one in there. There we go. Just the feeling of that, those dark shadows on that far side, on that beach there. Sort of a gentle slope down to the water's edge. Okay, let's do the same thing now for these, the middle ground boulders. I'll continue with this flat brush actually. Right, so this one here, I need to go quite dark there. Look how dark that is there. Actually, I am going to, I'll change brush actually, go back to my mop brush. I'll tell you why, because I need to be a little bit more precise in cutting around some of these lighter rocks in here. So I'll do the same kind of this technique, darker, thicker color, almost fairly dry brush strokes, and getting in the form of that middle rock. So let's mix some darker color in here, burnt umber, a bit of burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and get a good edge to that brush. So there's a shadow. On that left-hand side, that's that shadow there. And then we get really dark towards the base, but we need to, the actual bottom of these cliffs, we need to think about the shape of these boulders at the bottom of the rock and then the water's edge as well. burnt umber, ultramarine blue, a bit of cobalt blue as well. And this darkness is going to create a bit of contrast with the lightness of this rock here. Let's go quite dark, a little bit of alizarin crimson as well for good measure. Few little tiny cracks at the top. And if I think they're too dark, I just quickly lift off with my fingers just to get a softer edge. That right hand edge needs to be soft, the left hand edge harder. And then a few little lines there to create the effect of those little rocks in there. These smaller rocks out in the water, they need to again get a darker left hand side. And this one as well. Soften up the right hand edge. Could do this with a little damp synthetic brush. The rocks on the left hand side, as I said earlier, I think this is a pine tree, the branch of a pine tree coming out, but I actually quite like that dark shape there. It creates a balance to the other things going on here. So let's create that in there and something like that. There's that squarish rock. You can see we're getting a little bit harder with the edges as we come closer to us. Now this main rock here, a bit of a focal point, the tip of this rock. Let's go really dark, bit of neutral tint on that left-hand side. You can see this brush is quite good for doing these little thin cracks and just almost drawing them in with the point of this brush. So neutral tint. Doing a bit of negative painting around these boulders. Creating their form. Really don't know what's happening in that bottom left corner. I'll come back to that in a minute. Right, have I got this tip of this? So I keep looking at the photo for a little bit of inspiration, but there's a balance between getting in as much detail to just give the viewer that, you know, that is a rock and that's the form of the nature of the rock, the texture of the rock, and there's all bits of sort of knobbly bits at the top here. Go back to out here. There's a few little darker rocks just showing through the surf. Yeah, so just keep observing that photo. Just take a few minutes to ponder over how you're going to be replicating those rock shapes and the texture of those rocks. But a balance of not overdoing it, okay? There we are. Next, let's add in a bit of a soft edge to some of these waves here. Let me just see if there's any questions. I don't think there are. Okay. All right, a little bit of a softer edge to these, the edge of the waves here. It's a little bit too hard in places, so just trying to create a little bit of a feeling of some of that. So a small synthetic brush, that actually might be a little bit too big for me. Let me just so I'm dampening the brush and then squeezing it. I don't want too much water in there. I'm just going to gently tease away at some of these edges. Now let's see if we can get one of a much smaller brush here. Better. Pick up a little bit of cobalt turquoise. I just want to just put a few little additional waves and just a few extra marks in there. Right, continue soften up some of these edges here. Just adding in a little bit of darker color. Back to my mop brush. And a little bit, let's make some of the sea just a little bit darker. we go. I might just add in a little bit of, I use my white gouache just to get a few little extra sprays of water in there when that's dry. All right, next will be the tree on the right here. This, it looks like a pine tree to me, with these lower limbs devoid of foliage. The foliage has disappeared and there are a few little pine cones here and there. And then off that side limb, we've got these little sort of shorter, stubby little side leaves, side branches, again, leafless. All the pine needles have long since gone. Right, let's get in first of all. So I didn't draw this in, so I'm really just putting it in directly with the brush, and think about some of these lighter areas as well. Okay, let's get some of those in first. And a cad orange. So few little patches of that light, and then same brush, something really dark, well, neutral tint and burnt umber for me. Not black, okay, but it is quite dark. Yeah, predominantly that. Burnt umber, neutral tint. And then connect up these lighter areas. There's that. Side limb there. The branch that goes off in that direction. They really are all over the place, these branches. They are fairly straight, these side branches that come off. And then I'll come back to the tree with a smaller brush, but now this shade in the bottom right corner, well, there's a grassy area. Let's go neutral, sorry, viridian green, a little bit of blue in there. Bit of shadow behind these ledges. go really dark against the sea. And continue over into that bottom right corner. But try and vary the intensity of those values and maybe just lift off little areas as well, just where there might be some dappled shade in there. Perhaps a little bit of sunlight coming through the base of the tree, just across the ground. Back to the tree and the smaller, thinner brush. I think I use a little rigger brush. I have to get a similar effect to those branches. Another brush you could use is like a sword brush, basically a long, thin brush with a good point to it. Let's try this rigger brush first of all. So again, this dark mix, neutral tint, burnt umber, and these branches literally going all over the place, and then interspersed with these little cones here and there. Then in places there's a real big congestion of these smaller twigs. Not drawing in every single twig, but just to get the impression of this pine tree. Few more. And then some pine cones. perhaps some grass or whatever coming out from these cliffs. With this thinner brush, I could also just add in a few extra cracks into the rock, into these rocks here. Not too many, don't want to make it too busy. This left-hand side needs something. Consult the photo. Maybe a little bit of greenery here, the sort of vegetation at the top of the cliff. Maybe it just needs some, that's an extra dimension there. Let's go back to my mop brush and a fairly dry mixture of, well, let's use this spring green here. Bit of viridian green. A bright green, all right. Just a sort of indication of something else going on over there. And then this bottom left-hand corner, likewise, this vegetation down there. A little bit more on the left-hand side. We're nearly there. Perhaps a little bit of vegetation at the top there. Few little patches of that vegetation, but mainly at the top. Not sure if this greenery is coming out from a tree or it's actually some vegetation in the rocks, but just needs that an extra dimension in there. Right, we're nearly there. I just think I need a little bit of highlighting, a little bit of use of the white gouache just to get in a few more little sort of streaks of the disturbance in the water. And let's use a small synthetic brush, make sure it's clean, and a little bit of white gouache or white paint, but fairly thick. Get the consistency right, not too thin so that it goes all sort of milky, and not too thick so it's just like a very sort of like a dry brush mark, but too dry. And then just where we can see some of those white streaks, just a little bit, don't overdo it. Starting at the background here. And then some white streaks here, trying to emphasize that contour of that wave. then and thinner lines near to us. This rock's got just a few little white marks on it. Just get in a little bit more definition to this tree on the left, sorry, on the right. Now this pine tree, it's got some lighter bits and then some really dark sort of vertical cracks in it, sort of quite distinctive of pine trees, conifers. So let's get in some of lavender. Just a bit of coolness to that bark. And some of these little side twigs are catching the light. Maybe there. Catching the light there. Now the danger here is I'm actually putting in a bit of too much detail. I've got to be very careful to stop shortly, call it a day. There are these twigs and things. This right corner, not little blades of grass, not too much. No, definitely keep that simple and vague down there. The final thing I've got to do, I think, is just get in some darker vertical marks for the trunk of this pine tree on the right. And so my small synthetic brush and neutral tint, pretty neat neutral tint, and just a few of these darker marks in there. The trick is knowing when to stop. There we are. I think I'm done. All right. Just put a little bit of darker shadow. Need to be very careful not to go too dark. Darker shadow, back of the beach, just to give a bit more definition to that middle rock. Without trying to not make it look like a volcano. You see what I mean? There we are. Right, I might touch up just a tiny bit more when I've stopped filming, but I think that's pretty much it. So, Stillwater Cove. Let's go back to the source photo. Thanks very much to Steve again for the kind sharing of the source photo. But trying to get in the sense of the area here, Northern California, Stillwater Cove. Bit of movement in the water, even though it is still water, the texture and the warmth of some of those rocks, and also trying to see those sort of subtle variations in the color of those rocks. That sort of warmish color at the top, then a bit of a cooler band, and then going darker. Actually, as you look at it, you see almost a little bit of greenery there. Maybe it's a bit of seaweed or algae in there. So many different colors in there and textures. Little bits of white as well. I'm not sure exactly what sort of rocks these are. Almost sort of like granite or sedimentary rock. Yes, lots of variations in the texture of those rocks. And the framing of the right-hand side of the of the old pine tree there, trying to get the feeling of the bark on that tree. And these trees are obviously quite stressed here, dry conditions, summer, losing their leaves, and but they've got a lovely sort of form of the twigs and side branches, and creates a bit of nice dimension on that right hand side. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that. Let me just check and see if there's any final questions. But thanks for watching. I'll catch up with you on the next one for sure.